to give her talk. Well, she's going to tell you what she's going to talk about. But as a way of introduction, she finished her PhD from University of Chicago in 2020 and is one of our beloved colleagues making the migration over from Yale and US. So we're happy to welcome her into the department. And with no further ado, we'll give it to Sneha, who's going to take it away.
Thank you, Elliot, and Miguel for inviting me to this, and to Yokchan and Cheryl for all the organizational efforts. I really appreciate it. So I'll just get started with a bit of an overview. Oh, what's happening? Oh yeah, bit of an overview of the project that this particular talk is, I guess, a part of. And the project is called Moving Targets, Traffic Rules, State Authority and Urban Citizenship in India. And it's my PhD dissertation project. And it's sort of keen to kind of scratch the surface of a very popular stereotype around driving and road traffic in India, which is that, you know, Indian drivers are law breaking. There's a lot of chaos on roads in India. And yeah, there's people treat traffic rules as mere suggestions. That's what I was told very often, and was a stereotype I encountered particularly in US academia when I would tell them about my project. In India itself, law breaking is often linked to issues around nation building and often becomes symptomatic of a failed post-colonial public in attempting to govern itself or reform itself when it comes to traffic rules and driving discipline. At the same time, with road safety issues becoming more and more salient in public discourse, the urgency to kind of fix the problem of, in quotes, bad driving has become very much a part of a public conversation around order and discipline, especially in urban India. This is because of the volume of traffic. So I can tell you more about it, but motorization has accompanied rapid urbanization in big Indian cities. There are also questions around the aesthetics of what is often known as the world-class city. So as geographers and anthropologists have pointed out, the anxieties around what world-class cities ought to look like often hinge on the behavior of the citizens in these cities, along with the architectural and aesthetic sort of concerns around world-classness. So the unruly driver kind of figures as this bee in the bonnet of this project of world-class city making. Finally, there's been a lot of technological modernization of traffic law enforcement, which is what I'll primarily focus on today in my talk. So the research questions behind this big project have been primarily, why is road traffic and its management too vexing to policymakers, state officials, and citizens, and how are efforts at changing driving behavior shaping state-citizen relations in India, which is more a theoretical sort of question. And this larger project was built on 18 months of multi-sited ethnographic fieldwork in Hyderabad. So I did observations and field notes, semi-structured interviews, participant observation and interpretive analysis of news media with traffic police, who are the main actors in today's talk, for instance, the part of the police agency that enforces traffic rules in the city, motorists of various social classes, positions, and vehicles. So I interviewed tuk-tuk drivers, but also motorbike riders and car drivers. I also learned to drive as part of my fieldwork because I am a non-driver in India. So I had to kind of go through the process of learning to drive, and it gave me a good sense of how drivers are socialized into the road and what norms and rules are emphasized as being important for safety. Finally, I spent some time with local NGOs that are working on the issue of road safety, and I volunteered with them and was a part of a lot of pedagogical and persuasive campaigns around making people follow traffic rules. I also tracked news and social media that were brought up by my interlocutors. So I didn't do a big data content analysis by any means of social media or news media, but I tracked those pieces of news that were brought up in conversations or tended to become viral or gain some kind of visibility during my fieldwork. So coming to the talk today. I first encountered the term friendly policing in my very first meeting with the Chief of Hyderabad Traffic Police in March 2018. After I explained my intention to study traffic regulation in Hyderabad, he asked me if I had selected Hyderabad Traffic Police as my case study because of the innovative techniques being used by them. I asked him to say more, and he brought up the phrase friendly policing. He said, since 2015, we have adopted the principle of friendly policing, not just in the city, but all over the state. The goal is to provide uniform service delivery and a citizen-centric system using technology solutions. talking about how, with the technological modernization of traffic policing tools, police will be able to apprehend offenders with efficiency, expediency, and evidence, Kumar suddenly got very animated. But see, the larger point here is that technology is changing the relationship between citizens and police. Technology is the means to having more cooperation, trust, and better relations. Giving me an example of what friendly policing has to do with technological fixes, he brought up the example of what is known as non-contact enforcement. Earlier, traffic police used to issue traffic challans, tickets, for offenses without photographic evidence of the same. So, catch motorists on the road and ticket them. That used to lead to a lot of argument, denials, finger pointing, this and that. And of course, bribery. Most people would pay the traffic cop a small amount and go scot-free. Now we are relying more on what we call non-contact enforcement. Click photos of traffic violators, get their license plate info, send them a challan. Simple, easy, evidence-based, no scope for argument, fighting, and no scope for bribery. So what we are pushing for, friendly policing, is made possible by technology. As I noted all this down, Kumar rang his subordinate and asked him to bring us some tea. He asked me with genuine enthusiasm if I had seen the imposing command and control center that was back then in 2018 under construction in Banjara Hills. I said yes, and he remarked how then the then ruling political party, BRS, had been incredibly supportive of the police department. Bringing up a slightly different dimension of technology and policing, how he quipped, we need to change the image of the public when they think of the average policeman. Right now, they think of a baton-wielding, uneducated, rude, corrupt, and uncouth guy who's after their money. What we need is a tech-savvy, sophisticated, incorruptible, and fit police force with Bluetooth speakers in their ears and sleek tabs in their hands. Someone the public will want to obey. See, we want to communicate an image to the public that we are not the old kind of police that used old school methods to bring about discipline. We are the new police, we are service providers. We provide the service of safe roads, ordered traffic, quick and easy movement in the city. We're also training field level police to be friendly to commuters, soft-spoken and professional. Friendly. Before we can discipline drivers, we have to discipline ourselves in body and body language so that the public wants to cooperate with us. Kumar, of course, was not referring to himself as being the baton-wielding, uneducated, rude guy who needs to be disciplined. As the chief of police in the city, he was in fact a figure of much authority and respect. But he was not the one interfacing with citizens on a daily basis. In pointing out the image of the average traffic policeman, he was instead referring to a caricature of a traffic constable, which was most obnoxiously articulated by the controversial author and novelist Manu Joseph in an op-ed from 2014, where he says, "The face of the government, the cops, elicit no respect, not just because of their reputation, but also because of how they look. Their cheap uniforms and how they wear those uniforms, and how they sit on the roadside on plastic chairs, their large paunches like babies on their laps, and how 6 of them hide under flyovers to pounce on motorists in the great game that is Indian daily life." This view of the traffic police constable reeks of a classist perspective, but that was actually quite common amongst my elite interlocutors. Residual of a colonial era policing model, constables and home guards that comprise around 85% of the police force are, as some scholars have argued, subaltern within the police department. And Kumar's point that equipping these subaltern personnel with smart objects will make them appear more smart, tech-savvy, can be read in the context of this image makeover, which hinged on the aesthetics of authority. This move towards being slick and savvy service providers is part of a slow but steady disciplining of the street-level constable to reflect the broader agenda of traffic policing and friendly policing. Kumar, for most part, was deeply sympathetic to the difficulties of traffic policing. Addressing how the salaries of traffic police were recently increased by 30%, he said that most people don't get how hard it is to actually do the work of traffic policing. Standing in the traffic for hours on end, risking lung-related diseases, and constantly having to interface with an irate motoring public is not easy. Sometimes our field staff loses their cool, see their job as such, but we must remember that the levels of mistrust between police and public in India are quite high. So before we enact tough measures, we need them to understand the importance of policing. That is important for a safe and well-functioning society. As we were wrapping up our chat, a home guard employed as the office staff brought us 2 small cups of tea and a bowl of almonds on a tray. Bracing myself for the thick, extremely sugary chai that I associated with government offices, I peered into my cup. To my surprise, I found that it held the crisp well-being of green tea, Immediately, I made a comment about how I had half expected sugary chai. He let out a short laugh, sipped his tea, and then added, along with training our field police personnel to be more sophisticated and well-mannered with our commuters, I have even given them advice to switch to green tea in police stations. Disciplining our drivers means that we need to discipline ourselves first. Smart police, friendly police, healthy police. In Hyderabad, traffic policing as a practice has witnessed substantial changes in the past decade. From the deployment of body cameras to the use of laser speed guns, from the issuance of electronic tickets to the installation of automated number plate recognition cameras, technological modernization in traffic law enforcement is being championed as means to road safety. The police personnel of Hyderabad Traffic Police that I hung out with often joked and said to me, HTP, Hyderabad Traffic Police, actually stands for High Tech Police, also HTP. Under the larger regime of smart governance in neoliberalizing cities such as Hyderabad, technological solutions have become integral to service delivery, and Hyderabad Police has been particularly proactive on that front. Indeed, the Hyderabad Police has earned a reputation for experimenting with new and controversial technologies of policing. I was constantly told by senior bureaucrats with an air of pride that Hyderabad is the most surveilled city in the country. Research by scholars like Nikita Sonavane and separately Srinivas Kodali have shown that legibility projects deployed by the Telangana state and aided by technological infrastructure under the broader mandate of smart policing, such as increased camera surveillance, digital criminal databases, and facial recognition systems, are both violative of data privacy, reproduce and retrenched criminalization along caste and class lines, and create the conditions for unchecked police power in the state. I was often taken to the command and control room of the traffic police so that I could see how newer, more integrated surveillance technologies were going to propel Hyderabad into having more advanced, sophisticated traffic regulation. In the words of the head of IT operations in our police, our constables were using a fishing rod earlier and were able to catch one fish at a time. But with technology, it's like we're giving them a net. But in the context of Hyderabad's urbanization that has been long associated with what Asher Ghartner calls world-class aesthetics and inspired by Singapore, actually, about which I can speak more in the Q&A, this enthusiasm was also framed in terms of how the citizens see the state. Technology was often framed in terms of how it's also changing the image of the police and that this image makeover is going to inspire obedience. In other words, technology was framed as not just enabling a quantitative increase in law enforcement, but changing the qualitative relationship between police and citizens. The symbolic and communicative effects of technology were emphasized. This, I argue, is particularly important for traffic police, who are often the most visible arm of the state in everyday life. And this symbolic effect of technology creates a terrain of negotiations around the public image. But of course, there's a twist in the story. This appeal of what anthropologist William Mazzarella calls the performative efficacy of technological charisma extended to some extent to the street level traffic police personnel I spent time with, but in slightly different ways. Indeed, as Kumar himself put it, the excitement around the controversial command and control center was framed around its look. Showing me the plans for the daunting glass and chrome structure, the inspector of a city traffic police station said to me, "It must be common for you to see this kind of government office in America. But even having air conditioning and proper infrastructure for police is a new thing in India. Have you seen the SR Nagar traffic police station? It is operating out of a tin shed. It was because the building was demolished for the construction of an elevated metro system, but he didn't mention that. And the Nallakunta one, it's an old building that is on the verge of collapse. Imagine a police station that looks like a poor man's shack. When our buildings look like this, what is the image the public will have of our power? This is the main reason why people follow rules in malls and spit in government offices." We see here too a concern with the aesthetics of authority that, in this telling, shapes behaviors and attitudes towards the state. However, the purchase of the success of non-contact enforcement techniques of policing were less persuasive to some of my field level interlocutors. The problem with this technological euphoria, in their view, was that even though the issuance of traffic tickets was increasing with technological solutions, to make people pay up was not all that easy. A conversation from 2019 between two of my field level interlocutors illustrates why. Kasiram, nowadays with all these technology improvements, we are issuing so many challans. We have cameras at junctions, constable who take photos of rule violators on digicams, laser guns for speed violations, and we keep issuing challans. The problem is the public doesn't pay them. Adil, Just last year, we issued almost 4 million challans through non-contact enforcement. This year, the amount is already more than that, but recovery is still low. We keep issuing charge sheets, but ultimately drivers will pay the pending amount only when they are physically stopped by us. Kasiram, at the end of the day, whatever technology you bring, unless a Hyderabadi driver is caught on the road by us, he will not pay. The mentality is like that. When we are caught, we will see. Photos of motorists with multiple pending tickets, called snake challans, finally having been caught by the police, showed up on social media pages of traffic police as well as in local media. On the one hand, they index the volume of tickets being generated, but on the other hand, they reinforce the idea that motorists were not paying up unless physically apprehended by the police during random checks on the road. For the street level staff I interacted with, these images served up evidence of the difficulties of their job. One constable likened traffic policing to a game of hide and seek in broad daylight. To incentivize drivers to pay up their pending tickets, discounts began to be offered periodically and still are. In fact, it was one of the electoral promises of the current party in power is that traffic challans will be discounted. Generally, a mechanism for political parties in power to manage public irritation, for Kasiram and Adil, the fact that these discounts are offered points to the hollowness of a tech fix for a more complicated issue. They also very blatantly pointed out how political parties shaped the everyday world of traffic policing. For instance, when the National Motor Vehicles Act increased traffic penalties manifold in 2019, the then Chief Minister of Telangana refused to implement the new fines in the city, saying that he does not want to harass citizens. To date, the new fines have not been introduced. Relatedly, when it came to the mandate of friendly policing as an institutional disposition, street-level traffic police were much more ambivalent. Srinivas, a sub-inspector in the Panjagutta traffic police station, griped to me about the concept. All this friendly policing and all that will work in foreign countries where public is mature. In our daily work, we see how unruly the public can be. If they fear us, then some discipline will be there. If we are to be soft-spoken or friendly and all that, who will obey us? We need to induce some fear in the public, not all this friendliness crap. This apprehension around the potential of friendly policing to bring about any change was widely shared by some police who believed that the optics of a soft approach worsened their perceived disempowerment vis-a-vis the public, but also in the context of political unwillingness to increase traffic fines. But the introduction of body cameras for traffic police in 2015 was a pivotal moment in the larger strategy of friendly policing reforms in Hyderabad. While body cameras had been previously deployed amongst officers working on criminal investigations, it was for the first time that traffic police in the country had been equipped with body cameras. The stated intention of this technological intervention was to reduce the incidence of bribery amongst traffic police. But the introduction of the body-worn cameras began to acquire a very different narrative for the traffic personnel working the streets. Fully aware of the fact that accessing the footage of the body camera was within their control and not in the control of motorists that they were encountering, the cameras became less about their superiors watching them and more about recording the behavior of commuters with them. These devices that are intended to discipline lower-level staff became more salient in terms of their potential towards staging spectacles that project the traffic police as vulnerable in the face of an unruly public. As an inspector of a traffic police department put it to me, the body camera is more like a mirror in which society can see how uncivilized it behaves with our constables. They see this footage and they feel bad for us because they finally see how the police look scared of the public. Does it happen in any other country? You tell me. It also became important that I was coming from the US and they kept bringing up this difference of how the US police, works its image in public life. So this might be an exaggeration, and honestly, in my observations, it was an exaggeration. But in the context of traffic police feeling a sense of disempowerment in their jobs, the possibility of spectacular virality is what was remarkable in their desires for empathy and vindication, a strategic declaration of helplessness at the hand of the unruly citizen. This enabled the collective production of what some scholars have termed the public transcript of police power, that is, decorum demanded in encounters between policer and policed, when the latter is expected to be polite, orderly, deferential, and respectful in the presence of police authority. Thus, the disciplinary potential of an anti-corruption measure is turned around to point to a different kind of indiscipline, that of the motoring public. The synoptic power of body cameras worked alongside handheld digital cameras that constables possessed in order to carry out routine non-contact enforcement. That is, the same handheld cameras that were meant to generate traffic tickets without a skirmish, in Kumar's words, were useful in capturing skirmishes when they occurred. Let me illustrate with an example. On 15th April 2018, Constable Shrinu called me to ask me if I had seen the video. Shrinu, I inferred, was referring to a recording of an incident that occurred the previous evening in the southern part of the city, and the video had become viral overnight. Several of my interlocutors in the traffic police department had sent me this video on WhatsApp, often preceded by sentences like, "See video of woman misbehaving with Hyderabad police," or "Must watch sensational video, woman creating halchal, ruckus, with traffic police in Malakpet." In this 2-minute long clip, one can see a man and a woman on a blue moped having a heated argument with the traffic police on duty. The woman is clearly furious and with each passing moment is getting angrier at the police officer. The woman, who's wearing a burqa, can be heard shouting at him and refusing to get off her moped, even though he keeps asking her to. At one point, while shouting, "Hato, move," she tries to ram her moped into the police officer who's standing in front of her vehicle, trying to stop her from escaping. The police officer hardly seems threatened by her repeated threats of, "I will run you over if you don't move." And neither is he listening to her when she says, "Cut me a ticket, put it online, but don't stop me, don't you dare stop me." While she shouts and screams, the officer keeps gesturing to his subordinates to keep recording. Oh, okay. Maybe I'll show a little bit of this.
तस्वीरें हैदराबाद के मलकपेट पुलिस स्टेशन की हैं। 14 तारीख की शाम ट्रैफिक पुलिस नियम तोड़ने वालों की धरपकड़ में लगी थी। पुलिस ने स्कूटी सवार एक शख्स को बिना हेलमेट पहने पकड़ा और उसकी वीडियो रिकॉर्डिंग कर चालान काटने के लिए उसे रोका, लेकिन पुलिस की कार्रवाई से स्कूटी के पीछे बैठी महिला भड़क गई और उसके बाद जो हुआ उसकी तस्वीरें आपके सामने हैं। महिला ने पहले अपनी समझदारी दिखाते हुए अपने साथ मौजूद शख्स को
Okay. This particular video clip, and it's longer, but we don't have time, began gaining traction on Twitter and Facebook, and even national dailies had covered the story. And my informants at the traffic police could not be more pleased. The Times of India ran the headline, "Video of woman misbehaving with Hyderabad police goes viral." I could sense the glee in Shrinu's voice as he told me that I could show this clip to people in America, so they could finally see the kinds of ungovernable drivers the traffic police in the city had to reckon with on a daily basis. He bitterly complained, "Let the whole world see how immature our public treats its friendly police." The next day, when a professor of anthropology at the University of Chicago sent me an email with a link to this particular video, I thought of Shrinu's desire for wanting the whole world to see. Eventually, I learned that the context of this incident was that the traffic police were doing routine non-contact enforcement at Malakpet Crossroads when one of the police constables on duty used his digital camera to take a photo of the rider who was riding a moped without a helmet on, that is the husband. In order to issue a traffic ticket later on, he did that to issue a traffic ticket later on for no helmet riding. Upon seeing the picture of the rider being taken, the rider's wife, who was sitting behind him, alerted him and they proceeded to confront the cop. She demanded that the constable delete the photograph from his camera. She claimed that they were rushing to a nearby hospital and did not have time to remember to grab a helmet, and that by delaying them further, the police were doing an act of injustice. When the police constable refused to delete the photograph, she got furious, and what followed was captured by the police on cameras, resulting in the video that went viral. I found out later that the woman had a case filed against her by the police, but that case was withdrawn after she apologized to the police officers concerned. But not everyone was convinced by the story. For instance, Kareem, a 20-something Muslim auto rickshaw driver from Old City and one of my closest interlocutors, cautioned me, the gullible researcher from the US, to not believe the tricks of the Hyderabad police. In his cautionary advice to me, there lingered a more historically rooted suspicion. Why did the traffic police not just cut a ticket and let them go? Why did they drag the drama on for so long? Why did they film and leak this particular incident and not the several other incidents where police are harassing drivers in broad daylight and asking for bribes? Why did they treat the couple with such disrespect? Showing me a low resolution video on his Redmi smartphone, he insisted on me seeing the truth of the matter. This video that he showed me featured a young woman wearing a hijab and sitting at what seemed like a news desk, and she chided the traffic police for publicly humiliating women motorists in the city and playing politics just to gain popularity. After revealing that what was not captured on police camera was that the constable had touched the arm of the woman motorist roughly and had asked for a bribe, and that is what started the whole fight. That was her contention. The video ended with a warning that was purposely made to echo. Everyone knows what the reality of this friendly police is. Beware, Hyderabadis, beware. Putting his phone back in his pocket, Kareem scoffed dismissively. Traffic police loga videographer ban rahe. Traffic police are turning into videographers. The accumulated mistrust over decades of over-policing and biased policing in Old City came through in the interpretation of this video as yet another ploy to produce an already always unruly citizen in Hyderabad. In August 2018, yet another video of a young woman shouting at the traffic police who tried to book her for not wearing a helmet hit WhatsApp groups and local news channels. In this incident too, we see a similar dynamic. The police do not intervene. Instead, they keep recording the, in quotes, hysteria till the woman looks at one of the recording cameras and finally screams, "What are you looking at? This is not some mujra." Mujra being a musical dance performance, usually with sensual overtones, performed by female courtesans for an elite male audience. On several social media interfaces that I was sent links to, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, these videos awaited the judgment of the intended and unintended public. Apart from overwhelming sympathy for the police, manifest in comments such as, "Uneducated, low-class morons like her should be immediately arrested. The cop was so friendly and patient with her." Or, "Salute to the traffic police, hardest job in the world dealing with these illiterate fools." There was an overt reference to the fact that the police were dealing with a Muslim woman. One particularly well-liked comment on Times of India's website called the woman a burqa-wielding Islamic terrorist. Send that woman to Dubai or Saudi Arabia, where she won't even be allowed to drive. Another bitterly complained that India has two kinds of laws, one for Indians and one for Muslims. And one claimed that Hyderabad police is so scared of Muslims and even more scared of women. Has the police no izzat, respect? Shame on our feminazi society. That none of these comments seemed particularly out of place to me was also telling. These sorts of sentiments were strikingly similar to the way in which my middle and upper middle class, overwhelmingly Hindu men informants often spoke about drivers in Old City and women drivers. These two categories are hard to govern. Reading these reactions alongside my conversations with the police, who indeed felt vindicated when the video was going viral, one gets a sense of how this spectacle was strategic in consolidating the image of a police force that ought to and will be sympathized with. Just seeing the number of times the sub-inspector was keenly gesturing to his subordinates to keep recording, one gets a sense, a latent foreknowledge of the fact that the video is going to be seen by a wider public. Leveraging their connections with media and leveraging their visibility on social media, the traffic police department is able to gain sympathetic mileage. But of course, there's more. In December 2018, yet another video surfaced, but this time it was a young, seemingly upper-class man wearing a tucked official shirt with a trendy haircut driving an SUV. And he was stopped by the police because the breath analyzer test revealed that he was driving under the influence of alcohol. Upon being stopped, however, he did not acquiesce, and he instead started shouting at the police, alleging that not one of you can spell government in English. Not one of you can spell psychology in English. He went on to accuse the government of employing uneducated people who get a salary and job security, even though they cannot spell a single word in English. What Kumar, the senior IPS officer, had hoped would get hidden under the facade of technology, the non-English speaking rurality of constables, was in fact the centerpiece of this viral video. Furthermore, the motorist in this case even took his cell phone out and challenged the police to take him to jail, all the while claiming that that nothing will happen to him since he's a close relative of the then chief minister's daughter, and he will use her contact to punish all the police who are harassing him. Clearly inebriated, he articulated a public secret, the intertwining of police and politicians. But because the traffic police used the footage in their favor, it did them more service than disservice. Later, the drunk man became a source of memes and social media humor, even appearing on the local radio channel as a guest, where he, where he apologized to the traffic police for his behavior and persuaded everyone to follow traffic rules. In different ways, in all these cases, what is produced is a figure of the irrational and unreasonable citizen that is frustrating every effort at its own reformation. And in contrast, we see the traffic police standing by as if watching a cautionary tale unfold on its own accord. The calm and collected traffic police, friendly traffic police, juxtaposed with the angry, rude, uncivil commuter. A dramatic confrontation between the publicly appropriate composure on part of the inspector and unruly anger on part of the motorist. Producing the smart and friendly police that is free of corruption and bribery is contingent, I argue, on the production of an unruly citizen that is hard to discipline, and this category is mobilized across class, gender, and religious lines. What I hope to have brought to light in this talk is how technological modernization offers us more than a story, more than just a story of expanded surveillance and its attendant problems. While that is, of course, important, the expectations, narratives, and frameworks of technological solutionism exceed and trouble the intentions of top officials. They give rise to other sorts of issues around legitimacy, around image, around authority. The political context, structural and organizational hierarchy, and the historical context of police-citizen relations complicate the apparently unremarkable world of traffic policing. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sneha. Do we have some questions for her?
Just want to say I appreciate the earrings. Very on topic.
Thank you. Thank you for noticing and for the shout out. Very intentional choice.
I think
It's for the.
oh, okay. Thanks a lot for that really sort of excellent presentation, to say the least. So I'm kind of thinking aloud about two things. One is ethnography and being an ethnographer from India, writing about India. Something that you said really struck a note with me was this idea that people are giving you data as a justification of expectation of a wider audience through which their lives will be justified. I was wondering if you would want to speak a bit more about that, because I study politics, and there is always this sense of, you know, make sure you write this in your thesis and make sure you point this out to whoever you speak to, and like, you know, so there is that sense of an expectation of justice emerging from this data that is being given to you, and that's across the different strata of society, right? So that's one. I was wondering if you would want to think a bit more about one of the things you articulate in another piece that you wrote on relational ethnography, and this sort of sense that the state and the citizens, or actors, let's call them, are kind of in conversation with each other. Like, it's not like the state is the state and the citizen is the citizen. Like in this case, like, how did you see that playing out? I understand there are these viral moments, etc. But is this kind of governmentality also recreating a different citizen, or are the citizens just, you know, participating in the melodrama of this governmentality, where like the accused is the next day a star and, you know, on the radio channel or something like that?
The answer that first?
Yeah, go ahead. I think so.
Yeah, I think the question about ethnography is a very interesting one. And it was like, from the minute I started fieldwork for the police, it was very important that first I write a report on how to fix the problem of driving. And I was just like, I don't know. Because generally there were these two nodes around which much of the conversation circled back to, which was, should we punish drivers or should we persuade them? Like, is punitive measure a better way to fix the problem of driver indiscipline, or is it persuasion? And they kept asking me, what do you think is the right thing to do, right? And I had to keep saying, I don't know, it's complicated. And I was very unhappy with that answer. So one of the things that I was supposed to do, which I didn't do, unfortunately, was write a report on road safety issues in Hyderabad. And that was one expectation of, I guess, using the data that I was collecting to the service of the police, but also as a patriotic act. right? They would keep telling me, this is a way for you to actually make your country better. Another thing that kept happening was I used to attend these counseling sessions held by traffic police to counsel drunk drivers. And every time I would attend one of those, they would make me the ideal citizen, right? They would make me stand on the dais and say stuff like, look at Sneha madam has come from the US and she's writing PhD, trying to make country better. You people are driving drunk on the road. It's very bad. So there were ways in which I was brought into the conversation, much to my discomfort. But yeah, like, I don't think they ever really thought about this stuff actually becoming worldwide or becoming such a sensation, because they also, they didn't know what University of Chicago was, for instance, right? They were like, okay, America, some place in America. But it was important for them that I project a good image. And I was constantly quite nervous when I was doing observations, because I felt like someone was going to read something and get really angry. Now I realize my own unimportance in Hyderabad traffic policing, because who has the time to read all of this stuff? But that was like an unsaid contract, right? They were like, yeah, please write, you have to write something good. And the anxiety was actually to do with some sort of post-colonial relationship to the world, that don't project India as a third world poor country. Project it as a country that's on the cusp of becoming first world, that you don't want to reproduce ideas of the problems of India. You can show them the good side, like a almost narrative of optimism, right? And I do try to do that, I think, to some extent. But yeah, so that was the way in which that expectation as the ethnographer kept coming up. And I think an assumed solidarity with their politics, right? Because I am, at the end of the day, like an upper caste Brahmin ethnographer doing Hindu woman from a seemingly, like, in quotes, respectable background. So they would just say stuff, like really abhorrent stuff, for instance, about Muslim drivers, right? And think that I was going to just nod along because I agreed. So there were all those moments, I think, of discomfort and disjuncture that they were not quite keen on even thinking about because of our assumed shared solidarity. The relational ethnography part, yeah, so this is just one part of a larger chapter in which that production of the citizen actually comes in to greater focus. And I was joking with Vanessa before the talk that all puns intended. I tried really hard to discipline this talk into a 35-minute thing, but the point that I make in this article on relational ethnography is that the state and citizen are not presupposed static entities, but they're produced via interaction with one another. So the state is produced on the road, the citizen is produced through interactions with the state, right? So I do talk about how this kind of purchase of friendly policing or purchase of even like a changing policing is not consistent across different social classes, but also across drivers of different vehicles. So a different chapter, I show how potholes become sort of sites of a lot of political subjectivity in Hyderabad, precisely because they are felt more keenly by motorcyclists and auto rickshaw drivers. So car drivers don't care much about potholes, but auto rickshaw drivers and two-wheeler riders feel the bump as a certain kind of evidence of state neglect, or as an evidence of state neglect in particular parts of the city. So there are ways in which the citizen is produced throughout all the chapters, not just this one. This is just one part of it, if that makes sense.
We'll take Shahana and then.
Thank you. Super fun as always, and also compliments to the accessories. So couple of questions. One, it's so striking to me that there's so many different kinds of grievances, hurt sentiments, at play. Everybody seems to be hurt about something, but for very different reasons, right? This fellow is hurt; they don't know how to spell. The police chief is hurt because in this larger discourse, right, that they're being perceived as incompetent, and so at a big scale, the politics of hurt being that remake Hyderabad itself, right, as a modern, the kind of techno fix. Constables are so hurt. Commuters are hurt. So how should we make sense of the kind of politics of hurt, in a way, of hurt, of grievance circulating here? Very indisciplined, going in different directions. That was one question. The other was about, I'm also struck by, again, in a very playful way, you're talking about technology and clearly, the aesthetics of power and authority. But part of that aesthetics is not just how they're being seen, but the very question of seeing, visibility, invisibility, right? So if that female motorist clip, for example, the couple, the alternative spin being that something is left out of the video. Right, so much about kind of arguments around design politics is that design politics not just changes the form and kind of the symbolic and all the kind of signaling of meaning, but the very nature of information that you can or cannot get. Right, so like if it's a rickety shed, there's certain things you can see that are spilling out on display. They're made invisible when the nature of data itself shifts, the buildings change, right? So that was my other question, is about visibility, invisibility. How should we think about that?
So the first question I will say will be better answered by a new faculty member who's going to join South Asian Studies program soon, Bhumika Joshi, whose entire work is actually about politics of hurt and its framing. But thanks for pointing that out. I will think more closely with her work later on. That's not a framing that I was thinking about as much. But it is interesting because hurt also, of course, lends itself to a physical hurt, which is the whole point of like road safety interventions, right? To prevent injury of a certain kind. So I'll have to think a little more about that. But the question on visibility and invisibility is absolutely, I mean, yeah, that's the stuff of much of the literature on even on social media, law and policing, like the work by Forrest Stewart, for instance, who is arguing that the kinds of technology the police use actually frames an encounter in a particular way, right? And this, of course, extending then to what citizens can see of the state, and not seems to be a long-standing concern, again, of the state to manage how it is seen, right? Like what it shows and what it does not, and how it is seen in terms of it being the rational and the post-colonial public being, say, the irrational, which Veena Das also talked about a fair bit. So yeah, I'm thinking along those lines, but I don't have a quick and steady answer to offer right now, but stuff to definitely ponder.
Hi, Sneha. Sorry. Thank you for the talk. I think one of the major takeaways for me was the sweetening of the bitter pill of surveillance by all the swanky buildings and looking nice, and that way you can perhaps persuade the publics to surrender themselves, and that gave me a lot of food for thought. On the question side, while you were talking, what I felt was that the public says the hurt part, but I would go on a little bit of frustration part. There are a lot of frustrations and grievances with the state itself, and the abstract state manifests in the form of its agents. So perhaps when they are actually venting out something or trying to be unruly, it's not just the person per se. It's my disenchantment with the state itself. And then I think that this interface is not unique. I have to stand in 30 minutes to pay a bill. I have to get an approval for my water connection. All those things are the interfaces of the state through the manifest agents. And then I was thinking that how the police is a special case of that. Did you choose it deliberately? And what are the commonalities or differences? Is it like the shorter time frame because I have to reach somewhere in a fast city and therefore it provokes me a little more? Or perhaps I'm a little casual because I take my own time and I know government offices, there is always a lunch hour going on for someone, so the SBI phenomena, what we call. So I was just thinking that, did you choose it specifically? What are your thoughts on this interface idea?
Yeah. So in the dissertation and potentially in the book, one of the things that actually, yeah, you're right, because I was also thinking frustration, but actually more directly blame. So I was kind of theorizing blame as something that's constantly moving, and so the source of frustration on the roads as not being a fixed target, like it could be the unruly citizen, but it very quickly becomes within the unruly citizen. It could be the old city driver, it could be the elite driver, it could be the auto rickshaw driver. So the source of frustration of what is causing a very hard terrain to kind of drive in keeps shifting. And then through the book, I also show how it's not just the road, right? So here you see the police, in another chapter, you see the RTO, the driving license issuing agency. how brokers in the driving license interface kind of reproduce a certain understanding of driving as not something that can be evaluated, as something that you practice on the road. So the fact that there is corruption, I argue, is not just, it's not just a money issue, but it also creates a certain narrative around driving, that you can just pay and buy a license, and that's fine, because driving is anyway not something that you can learn and then do. It's something that you pick up. So in several different ways, in several different chapters, there are different kinds of interfaces that's happening. But because I focus on the act of driving, one of the things that I want to kind of think carefully about is how we're not looking just at a state citizen relationship, but we're looking at the state in a motoring body, as you put it, right? So there's a sensorial aspect to what driving does. The heat, the traffic, the potholes, the noise, it kind of creates certain kind of sensibility towards the state that is then felt either in the pothole or in the unlicensed speed bump or in the jams or when you come face to face with traffic police authority. So it is specifically actually the difference. I think it is true of a larger condition of frustration created through delays, through inefficient governance, but there is also something particular about, for instance, this where you're drunk and driving and then you get caught, right? And what kinds of skirmishes that produces, or feeling a sense of entitlement over one's vehicle, and when that's being seized by the police, having a reaction of frustration, as with the woman on the moped, right? So there are these, I think these reactions get heightened. And a lot of scholars have already argued that automobility, driving, these are all highly emotional acts, precisely because of their like deeply sensory sort of nature, right? So that creates a particular kind of disposition. And so I try to think more about the motoring body rather than an abstract citizen, actually. So, yeah.
Okay, one here, and then we'll take here, and then there.
Hi, Sneha. Thank you so much for this really rich talk. I want to pick up on a couple different themes that have come in the questions so far, particularly the point you made about the way, how so important for you, the way state and citizen are mutually created, like through these really like mundane material practices like driving. That's something I think about a lot as well. And I find it really important to focus on how these like really big things are created in these small practices, but also how the same creations are also exclusions.
Right.
Right. And particularly in this case, there are a lot of exclusions going on, particularly around gender and religious status. And I guess what I was trying to think through was like, these things as they travel up and down through these different scales, what's really the driving scale here? Is this part like, when people are looking at Muslimness as being this point of exclusion in driving practices, is that being driven from the top down, or is it kind of emerging from the bottom up? And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting and important question. I would say they come from both, right? And again, because the state and the citizen are not quite disentangled, because a lot of the top cops are coming from a particular social position and a particular class and gender and religious position, there are certain stereotypes that one can see predominantly there. Like, for instance, whenever I would be talking to cops, they would be like, traffic policing is different north of Musi and south of Musi. South of Musi being the Muslim dominated area in the city, but they would always be like, don't write this, or like, don't tell anybody that we told you this. And like the ethics of not telling that seemed worse than the ethics of breaking their promise. So I do talk about it, but that kept coming up like as something that the police were also aware of. But it was also very common, like the kinds of stereotypes I heard amongst especially elite Hindu residents were sometimes like very well thought out conspiracy theories, right? So a lot of them would be like, young Muslim men are very unruly on the streets on their bikes because they don't drink, and so they don't have no other form of expending a certain kind of youth excess, right? So their way of partaking of pleasure was to be risky on the roads because they don't drink. So that was one theory and I kept hearing it with astounding like regularity. So I was wondering where that really came from. I'm sure there's some source somewhere who's peddled this, probably some, anyway. So I think it showed up in both ways, the driving forces. For women drivers, it was interesting. On the one hand, the state was pushing for more women drivers, especially in terms of women cab drivers. Right? There was a lot of visible efforts at making that, incentivizing that, at least in terms of their communications, but not actually in terms of any structural change, like no pink loans, which was one of the things that women drivers really wanted, but those were not quite instituted, right? So there was a little more variation actually when it came to women drivers, but in these cases it was woman and Muslim. So that twinning, I think, was particularly resonant for the potential for this kind of news to sort of circulate with a lot of speed. Yeah.
I want to just echo all the people also who have said wonderful things. It was really a great talk. I always enjoy hearing you speak about your research. I wanted to ask, so there was a lot of focus on what the police have recorded and the police recording the people. So, the whole surveillance thing always has the surveillance aspect as well, right? So what about the videos taken by motorists every time an altercation starts? What did you observe?
Yeah, there was also lots of that. So that comes also in the chapter, the later, bit after this part is done, about counter videos often recorded by motorists, right? And local media channels actually liked receiving both. So they play, so like TV9, which was one of the big channels where I would see a lot of these videos, would also show the counter videos of Hyderabad, the police, so-called friendly police playing politics. Like this is often coming up in that sort of phasing. And in those instances, we see much more a focus on, showing the crowd, to show that the crowd has witnessed this act where friendly police has done something, especially again in Old City, right? The other thing that police did, and also for the benefit, I think, of commuters, is that tying up with local media channels to do coverage of drinking driving checkings. So I used to go to this part of the city where a lot of elite residents live, called Jubilee Hills, and there are lots of bars and restaurants in that area. So I have accompanied the police a couple of times, like 4 or 5 times, on their drinking driving checkings. And it would be very weird to me that there's an entire like flashlight driven like media crew, right? And what they're looking for are celebrities, and they're looking to catch celebrities, and that they did catch a few celebrities in the act of being drunk and driving. And because drinking has such a moral sort of immoral connotation, it would become again sites of certain kind of scandal, right? So media were definitely interested in different kinds of videos, not just the ones in which traffic police are shown in a particular way, but these would be posted on the official media pages of traffic police force, not the other ones. So the other one is a little bit more of a risk around whether it becomes viral or not. Like with I keep coming back to the chapter on potholes because I was just working on it, but similar to potholes, right? So citizens would take pictures of potholes, but it's a matter of complete chance whether it goes viral on Twitter or not, right? But if there's a picture of a traffic policeman filling a pothole, that would definitely be pasted on the traffic police webpage. So there was, I think, a little more by chance around whether motorist videos actually gain a wider audience than with these.
Yeah, I'm also from geography, a few of us here. I'd be interested in your reflections on something slightly different. And that is road safety as a public health, political, or kind of anti-political, kind of apolitical issue, because the numbers, as we know, I'd just like to hear your reflections on that since you've done this work.
Yeah.
But for those who don't know it, I just went to authoritative source, The Hindu.
Yeah.
19 deaths per hour in India, 168,000 per year. The leading cause of death between ages 5 and 29 is road traffic, is roads. Yeah. And there are similar figures, similar appalling figures from many other countries. India leads the world. I'm sorry to say, according to this data. Yeah. China, deaths, mortality fell during the height of COVID because the deaths on the road collapsed and the Chinese rates are tracking India's. So I just, having done this work, because it frightens me, when I travel a lot, like a lot of us, yeah. As when I was in Iraq, I remember the first thing, the briefing was, the greatest danger is road traffic, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I'd just be interested in some reflections on this as a public health, as a political, as an anti-political, as an apolitical, And I realize it's not the focus of this excellent work, but as a scholar, it would just be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Thanks.
As we're running short of time, might we take the 3 questions that I saw, and then Sneha, if you could try to answer them.
There's also a question on Zoom. One question.
So I saw a hand back here. Do you want to read the question out on Zoom first?
Hello. Hello,
Hi,
is
Sneha.
it my
Great
turn?
talk.
Okay.
My question is is enforcement of such technological initiatives for better road safety harder also because the idea of risk and road safety is still in the minds of people is still I was just going to the next shop. Why do I need to wear my helmet? They are harassing me. So the idea of road safety and wearing a helmet or car seats for kids, wearing seat belts and all being seen as unnecessary harassment and very elitist. So does it make it harder to implement this for the Indian crowd?
I think that's the one.
That was a lovely talk. So my question was also about relationalities that you were discussing, and how, in a way, you were an insider yet an outsider because you were seen as someone coming from Chicago. So how did your understanding of these relationalities, especially when within these entire networks of who is considered as blamed for road safety or considered as irresponsible on the road, how did those ideas of who is blamed really change, and how was that informing your understanding of relationalities because you were an insider outsider in different ways?
And then last one. Did you have one too?
Sorry to take the last one then. I'm just curious because I think I might throw another variable into this entire equation, but I do agree with you like very strongly about how like a government and institution produces like its victim, and the victim itself produces its authority. And I was just wondering, because I remember that you mentioned earlier about one of the police stations being moved because of the metro. And I'm just wondering what kind of complicitness this authority figure has in mobilization of a city. And to clarify, I'm wondering how the installation of this metro, which is also like this symbol of technology, right? How does that kind of change the citizen, the unruly citizen that the state is trying to produce? Because it's significantly more difficult to kind of be unruly on a train that you're not driving it, you're just there, you know? Yeah. So I'm just wondering, like, if the metro as a symbol of mobilization, one, undermines the traffic laws, but second, also changes like this production of this unruly citizen stereotype and how that affects your friendly policing, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I'll answer that first because it's just something I was just reading an article just yesterday about how Hyderabad police is very upset with the fact that there are lots of people dancing for Instagram reels on the metro. There are lots of different kind of unruliness altogether. The other source of unruliness on the metro when I was there is there are ladies only compartment, but there's no physical demarcation. So you'd often find men sitting there, and then the women come together and like push him out. That's sort of like a management. Yeah, I do think that when the elevated metro was being constructed, that's when I was doing field work. What was most interesting is that there were these pillars that were being built in order to hold the metro aloft, right? And that created a whole new ecological landscape to navigate when you're driving. And there were lots of jokes and again, like a lot of escaping anger in the form of jokes, basically around how the Hyderabad road is like a video game now. You have to constantly like memorize manholes, memorize pillars. There were some accidents also where motorists kind of couldn't see the pillar in the dark, and especially two-wheeler riders would hit the pillar, right? And the police are using that to kind of leverage yet again, like, oh, see, look at our drivers, they're not driving carefully, they're overspeeding at night. But the issue was actually a lighting issue, lighting issue, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's different sources of unruliness now to answer very briefly, but I think I'll weave that into the other questions. Road safety is a really important public health issue. And when I first started out, right, I was actually taking a public health perspective on this. So I was speaking a lot to scholars, epidemiologists at IIT Delhi, doing a lot of interesting work on injury prevention. But some of the findings are actually quite counterintuitive. For instance, they pointed out how police often tend to police slow-moving vehicles like auto rickshaw drivers in big, dense parts of the cities, but those are not causing fatalities. right? So fatalities are actually being caused on big expressways, on roads in which you can actually go very fast. But the focus of traffic policing in cities is still much more concentrated, right? And so that to me pointed out like a different issue. That's why it became an urban issue for me. Otherwise, if I were doing a purely public health perspective project, I would be looking at highways and expressways because that's where you see most deaths. That came up interestingly in my fieldwork because Hyderabad is also kind of hugged by an 8-lane expressway called the Outer Ring Road, which is both a source of this kind of world-class aesthetic pride, but also the background for a lot of deaths, like dramatic, spectacular deaths, right? So we had film stars, politicians, have really again spectacular deaths, and Ravi Sundaram calls them shock images that then circulate in TV media, and they kind of fix that moment where the car hits a divider or hits another car and the mangled bodies and all of those kind of grotesque imageries, right? So my work is definitely not trying to imply that road safety is something that's not important. My point is just that when you open up the box of road safety a little bit, especially in the context of what's going on in cities in terms of consolidation of police authority, you see a slightly different story, one that's a lot more complicated, one in which, for instance, as Shrija, you were saying, enforcement is hard precisely because people's understanding and relationships to risk and safety are slightly different, right? So I used to hear a lot of people say, I don't wear a helmet just when I go out. And then followed by a story of, oh, but this one person I know just fell off his motorbike when he was going to a street shop next door. So there is, what I was trying to find out more is what people's relationship to risk and safety is. And what came up was that it's not just a matter of fixing driving habits, but it has much more to do with how people perceive risk, safety, pleasure, but also how they see the state and how they understand its intervention as being desirable or something to be resisted, right? But I completely agree with you. I think it is, for me, it was interesting how it went from being an apolitical issue to actually a very highly political issue. What ended up becoming obvious to me was driving is actually not just driving. There's an entire world of class politics, gender politics, religious, fault lines that come up when you look closer at that seemingly apolitical act of driving or an apolitical act of making roads safer. So that was sort of the intervention. But indeed, road safety figures are appalling in India. And again, the sites where they are appalling, not that much focus when it comes to public discourse. Always big cities which are actually not contributing as much to road deaths. The other question was around insider-outsider positionality. I always think that if anybody else had done this research, everything would have been different, right? It was also the fact that I had certain connections. So I attended several national workshops in different police centers, right, where IPS officers from all over the country, Indian Police Service officers from all over the country would kind of convene to do workshops. So the kind of access I got was purely because of my social positioning as an insider, right? But the outsider aspect came in, and I do think that a lot of what was told to me that's why I'm a little wary of only seeing the police perspective, because there was a lot of, if not exaggeration, a certain kind of performance, right? Of, again, helplessness, performance of a perceived sense of disempowerment. I'm pretty sure that if some other people that I know, especially local ethnographers, had done this research, the tone of talking about this kind of delegitimization might have been different. So I do try to weave that into the writing itself, but it is something that I think, I just try to be upfront about the fact that it totally depended on who I am and what I come across as. A lot of mansplaining that turned into data for me. I was like, yes, bring it on. No worries. I couldn't nod along. Yeah.
All right. On that note, join me in thanking Sneha for this talk. And as we didn't have time for all the questions, you can grab her during lunch, which is available out here. And on April 4th, we have our next talk by economist Ruben Durante. So back to our normal time, next Thursday, 10 days from now. Thanks.
Fantastic.